if we're in a like paradox. The people who are early adopters and mid adopters are so excited about all these things that are happening. The people who do not have a device or don't know how to use a device or don't have broadband at home are getting left further and further behind because the industry is growing so rapidly. How long did it take people to get, like 100 million people had cell phones? It's like 7 years. Then it was, how long did it take Facebook to get to 100 million users? It was like 2.9 years. How long were they estimating it would take 100 million people to use ChatGPT? And they were like 9 months. A lot of issues can't be addressed because the people who have the resources don't listen to the people who experience the problem, the issues. A lot of that is changing, and now you have foundations that talked about ensuring that there's lived experience. You can spend a lot of money and have zero impact if you're coming up with a solution that's not community-based. There's literature coming out now and data coming out now that say that we're not going to see any movement. Like the increase of digital literacy is stagnant because federal funding has gone away. So we are going to have to take a step back and say, okay, so now what do we do?
And then for kids, access to technology means something else as well. It means how do you use technology for good instead of for brainless, useless things that keep our kids occupied for 4 to 6 hours a day now, glued to their devices. Hi everybody, my name is Tony Salvaggio. Welcome to E-Revolutionary, the podcast where we figure out what revolutionary ideas are out there and bring the people that are making it happen. Remember that this podcast is produced with used and refurbished technology because we're sustainable. And today we have the amazing Veatrice Farrell. She's the Chief Community Officer for the Digital Education Foundation, and she sits in a very interesting spot because she is right there where community and empowerment happened. And you have a wealth of knowledge of connecting with the community. It's an honor to have you here. How are you doing, Veatrice?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. It is always good to talk about how to increase digital literacy in our community.
Digital literacy is such a loaded topic.
Yes.
Because if there's one thing that is certain is the evolution of technology.
Yes.
How has technology played a role in your life, Veatrice?
That's an interesting question, and one I think is kind of hard to answer because it is such a part of everything that I do that we don't even notice it. We don't notice how we use our phones to get places because we don't know where we're going. And I think if we look at how much we use technology, it's easier to, if you want to take a step back and say, not everyone has access to it, and how can we fill that gap?
And the gap of technology has a different flavor for every community that gets to experience what that looks like and what that feels like.
It's even what it looks like, what it feels like, and how quickly people adopt. I was at a seminar and the speaker talked about how quickly people are adopting to technology now. And they gave an example of how long did it take people to get, like 100 million people had cell phones. It's like 7 years. Then it was, how long did it take Facebook to get to 100 million users. It was like 2.9 years. And this was a year ago. How long were they estimating it would take 100 million people to use ChatGPT? And they were like 9 months. So technology is moving at such a pace that sometimes we don't even notice it. And when we talk about digital literacy and bridging the digital divide, there's layers to it. There's a significant amount of our population that just uses cell phones. And for digital literacy, we don't consider that, the industry doesn't consider that part as digitally literate. It's a device at home, fast broadband, and the skills to use that device. And without all three, a significant portion of our population will get left behind. For example, can I give you 2 examples?
I would love to.
So starting information came out in April of this year that if you wanted to access FEMA, the Florida Emergency Management Administration, you could not if you did not have an email address.
Well, federal emergency.
So we are out of hurricane season. Yeah. Yay, because we're in Florida. But can you imagine if you're 62, you don't have a reason to have an email? Right now, you couldn't access FEMA. If we had a hurricane, there would have been everyone who didn't have access would have been at a library. Also, for individuals in our community that get federal payments, it's been extended. And so I think the end of December 31st, 2026, and they might have done an extra extension, that there's no longer going to be paper checks. So if an individual doesn't have access to banking digitally, they're not going to be able to access their money. So of course, the federal government has a pay card. So there's a pay card. You can get a pay card. The issue about the pay card is it can be costly, because if you have a pay card, for every deposit that you receive, that's the number of withdrawals you can do with no charge.
Interesting.
So if we're in a paradox, the people who are early adopters and mid adopters are so excited about all these things that are happening. The people who do not have a device or don't know how to use a device or don't have broadband at home are getting left further and further behind because the industry is growing so rapidly. If we look at the adoption, like 7.9 years, 2.9 years, and then 90 days, how quickly people are adopting this technology. So when we talk about a gap, it's huge. And using, again, cell phones are great, but there's a significant amount of activity that you can't do on a cell phone. For example, you can't use a cell phone to access any detailed information from the IRS. You can go to irs.gov and they can tell you maybe what you have to fill out, but you can't get into the system.
Interesting. I agree with you. The sort of the desktop versions of a lot of dense websites have not been made mobile friendly, and that creates a problem that a lot of people don't really think about. And when you're saying what you're saying, and you try to understand the concept of 3 billion people in the world that have never sent an email in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
When you try to even understand the concept of digital access in a country like the United States, it's like food insecurity. You don't really fully understand that such a rich country can have problems like food insecurity, like access to technology. But these are problems that we are experiencing, and they're costing us a lot of money and resources.
Yes.
Have you ever known about digital opportunity and the gap that exists? How did you get involved in learning more about community engagement and really the gaps that we have in our communities?
For like over the life of my career, I've always been engaged in some form of community work. I used to be a commercial lender, and I consider that community work because, I was allowing people to build businesses with outside funding. I've worked in a variety of nonprofits that sort of focus on building community. And I think I got involved in digital inclusion because I have a colleague who worked in worked at a district that was part of what's considered a smart city. The city of St. Petersburg is considered a smart city, and what that really means is that they do a lot of grants around transportation infrastructure using smart technology. And so I was approached to co-lead an effort to bring an initiative to St. Pete called Tech Goes Home. And I was approached because the work that I was doing at the time was really community focused. I worked on a historic corridor, African-American corridor in St. Petersburg. And so through that work, I had contacts and worked on projects throughout community. One of the challenges always is there is a need in community that is generated outside of the community. Like, oh, everybody needs to get, new ink pens. And especially we can look at the data and say, this area doesn't have a lot of ink pens. So we want to bring in ink pens. But without community trust, people aren't going to, even if they're free, people don't want your ink pens because we don't know you. Why are you giving us? So it's not, and that doesn't lead to building community if people who aren't in community don't want to sort of integrate yourself. And that sounds like it's a lot, but it really isn't. It's, you show up and you build relationships, and the relationships could be every year you're at a community event and you're a vendor and you meet community that way. So it's not really hard to get engaged in community. There's just not a roadmap of how you do it. So
there's a lack of education to begin with on some of the issues.
There is and there isn't, because a lot of issues can't be addressed because the people who have the resources don't listen to the people who experience the issues. A lot of that is changing, and now you have foundations that talked about ensuring that there's lived experience. For example, the Continuum, the Homeless Coalition in Pinellas County, they have someone on the board who was homeless or formerly homeless. And so that is so, when people are thinking of we should do A, you have somebody who has lived experience and says, let me tell you why that's not going to work.
Right.
But if you just change it a little bit, then you can have buy-in, because that's what we want. We don't want to say we're addressing an issue and we really are we're not having an impact. You can spend a lot of money and have zero impact if you're coming up with a solution that's not community-based. So when I was approached to co-lead this effort, I was like, yay, I'm all in, because the goal was to bring Tech Goes Home to St. Pete. And Tech Goes Home is an initiative. It's based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Boston, where it's a train the trainer initiative. So you train people who are in the community how to train people in community how to use devices. So that was the reason everybody got together. So we had a first meeting in February 14th, 2020. I remember that because it was Valentine's Day, and someone had on like a Valentine's Day dress. It had tassels all over it. It's like, because they just felt like being festive. So there's about 30 people there, representing 24 organizations. eSmart Recycling was there. Well, colleges, the city, the library system, the entity that provides cable to the community. I'm trying not to use names because I think that's probably easier. Because we had an individual that had a hair salon that converted the front part of their hair salon to a community tech house. Because, we had this big meeting, February 14th, yay! And then less than 30 days later was COVID. So everybody had already met. So it's like, oh my God, what do we do now? How can we help community? Because everyone who attended the meeting was community focused. And the fact that there was a conversation about increasing digital literacy before COVID hit was, that was a blessing.
It's very timely.
Providence, as some people would say, because we already had people who were committed to doing this work, and now we had to pivot. So there were several community members who okay, so what are we going to do now? And we had businesses like eSmart Recycling who already had been recycling devices and deploying them in community. You worked with a local college that had been doing recycling drives for 3 years before we got started. And so everybody came together and we're like, okay, so they said, hey, you all can take this. And so we had this working group of people who were focused on increasing digital literacy. So we had a business that did outdoor Wi-Fi. So we had 3 outdoor Wi-Fi on the corridor where I used to work. And so people who didn't have internet at home, at least they could go somewhere and, they could access it because it was an open Wi-Fi source. The school board, which was part of the working group, they started giving away devices, and they also gave away these little, laptops, and they gave away these little devices that allowed you to do, they call them dongles. You can access internet at home. So we did, I think, the best that we could do. And that sort of built the muscle of now we don't have to talk about digital, how much people depend on using the internet, because it was right in our face. And so for individuals, a lot of people started remote jobs. And so that's one of the reasons we saw an influx of individuals to the Tampa Bay area, because everyone was remote. And so if you had a chance to, let's see, do I want to live in the Midwest or the Northwest where it's cold? I can't go to the office anyway. Or do I want to move to Florida? So, because I no longer have a commute, right? And these people are no longer, I think in a lot of tech jobs and top tech roles, remote was already sort of a thing, but it wasn't adopted by practically everyone.
For sure.
Zoom, if we had purchased Zoom stocks in 2020.
I know, power of hindsight. I think it's key what you're saying, because access to technology is one of the pieces of the puzzle. And when we're trying to address the issue, we've seen throughout the years a lot of different isolated initiatives that specifically target access to devices, from one laptop per child more than a decade ago to local programs that identify, hey, there's X number of people in the community who don't have computers. Let's go out and buy those computers and give it to those people. And it doesn't work like that. What you described earlier in how trust with the community is key. It's also related to understanding of the issue, and every community even if it's, and we experience it here locally, when we are in one county versus a different county, neighboring one, sometimes it feels like you might as well be in two different countries.
Yes.
And the local and regional rules and regulations and processes that have been created, they're completely different. And the prioritization of issues are completely different. So when you were in St. Pete, a lot of your community work has happened in St. Pete. And there was this opportunity to talk about the issue in a way where everybody understood the true pain point, because COVID shone a light at, hey, access to computers is one part of the puzzle, access to connectivity and internet, it's another part of the puzzle. But you also need to teach people what to do with all of this access to technology and what's available to them.
Right.
So then that has led through a more holistic evolution of what digital opportunity is.
Right. I think if we look at, there's a national model, if you will, for lack of a better word. I mean, like every industry has a trade group. Mm-hmm. And in digital literacy, it's the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA. And they've been operating for probably almost 20 years now. And it's interesting. Like I went to a conference. The conference I referenced where they talked about how the adoption rate of technology has gotten so much quicker. Mm-hmm. And they said, in our first, because I think that was maybe the seventh annual meeting they had, they said the first one had 50 people. And the last one that I went to had over 700.
You think because of technology's fast evolution?
No, it was COVID, because then, you had a dedicated group of people that have been talking about digital literacy for years.
Right. Do you think the Broadband Act probably helped?
Well, COVID helped. And then you're right, the Broadband Act, because then there was money for it. Because you can have an issue all you want, but unless someone says, here, I'm going to give you money to fix it, it doesn't really get fixed. Because people have to see the issues like, oh my God, we're sending out all this stuff via email and people don't have emails. Well, we're just going to put it online, for who? So you're right. It's COVID really shined a light on how much digital literacy was needed. Because again, 25 years ago, I can remember there was a federal program called Bridging the Digital Divide. The issue was, this was during dial-up. You might not have been alive then. But it was dial-up, because remember AOL, and, everyone had dial-up, so you had to use your phone line, and it was slow. We didn't know it was slow because it wasn't slow to us because it was new. So, back then when the data was already there, all these people don't have computers. Mm-hmm. So the federal government said, we're going to give people computers, but without making sure that they had connectivity and that they also had the skills to use it. All those devices became pieces of furniture.
Right. It's usually an afterthought.
Yes.
Because it's, we get to experience that in an interesting way because of the sort of the business model that we've attached to it through the recycling of the computers. And we even see it from that perspective where people don't fully even know that there's a recycling issue with our electronics. They don't even know that. They don't even know what happens, to be quite honest.
Well, and that's a paradox because especially in Florida, we like to think that we're green, but any place you go to recycle, they're like, no electronics. So we've trained people to recycle plastics and soda cans. Think about it. how we train them because it's like, oh, it's 10 cents. You had to. I used to live in Michigan, and so anytime you bought cans, it was a 10-cent deposit, and so then you took them back because then you get your 10 cents.
Right. Right.
So community was incentivized to recycle, and then it becomes a habit, and then you start reading about how the plastics impact the water and the air, and people start realizing we live in this beautiful place. We have natural resources. We have to take care of them. So I think they believe they're starting to think about recycling. You bring up a good point, but there's not a place to go about e-waste.
Right.
And what is great about eSmart Recycling is because now we can start to tell the story about e-waste and recycling. And so there's organizations on a municipal level that talk about recycling. We have Earth Day and people talk about recycling. So we can, as long as we keep getting that message out about why it's so important to recycle. Like if you live in Pinellas County, they have articles about how there's like no room in the dump. So it's going to become an issue. So that's an issue we can take to Pinellas County. Like, hey, in that dump, like 95% full.
Mm-hmm.
We have a way that we can reduce we can add a couple of years. And so the market is open. It's just, we have to train people that you don't necessarily, you don't want to recycle and get paid for it. You want to recycle to an organization that takes the waste and has an impact on community. Recycling should not always be a profit margin.
Well, and the thing is that you've hit the nail on the head. And it's one of those things where if you want to do more of something, make it accessible. If you don't want to do more of that thing, make it hard. Just like eating, if you don't want to eat the sugary things, put them away. Don't have them close to your hands, reach. With the issue of recycling is that electronics, they're very complex as opposed to plastic or glass or even metal. The complexity of these devices makes it extremely hard to recycle. And then that's why not a lot of industries are necessarily, or not a lot of companies are drawn to figure that out. And now that's why we have an e-waste crisis. But even more than that, it's like we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
And at a municipality level, when you have folks that are coming in and recycling their devices, the fact that they have to, well, if you see where they put it in a garbage dumpster, and the moment somebody comes in with a device and dumps it in that garbage dumpster, then at that point is where it's turning into e-waste. Not at the point where they stop using the device. Is how it's treated after the fact.
Right.
And that small piece of education and awareness is exactly where the magic needs to happen from a recycling perspective. But from a digital access perspective, that line is blurry because so many people need access to technology for so many different things. The seniors need access to technology because they've never really seen the importance of why they need technology. And at this stage of their lives, there has never been a motivation to educate themselves in technology. Now that's changing.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the middle, age of the spectrum, access to technology means workforce development and access to better jobs and access to a better quality of life and access to skill sets that can make them a more productive individual. And then for kids, access to technology means something else as well. means how do you use technology for good instead of for brainless, useless things that keep our kids occupied for 4 to 6 hours a day now, glued to their devices.
Right. I mean, it's like anything in small doses is good. And so now, like in foreign countries, there's legislation that children can't get on social media sites until they're at least, I think, 18, 16 or 18. So there's always this, we have something and how can we make it good?
Right.
Because if you think about it, a long time ago, it was, don't put your children in front of a TV. The cartoons were rot their brain. And then the way I think the society responded is, okay, let's get something for kids. So you had PBS for kids, and you had Sesame Street. And you had all these shows that were like learning shows. So that's how we respond. It's like, okay, so if you have a device, then just make sure that your children are doing fun learning stuff.
Right.
So having a device is not necessarily bad. It's like they called them TVs in my day. So you looked at TV. So I don't think that I'm one of those people like, oh no, kids can't have TV or they can't have devices. They just can't use them all the time. And a lot of companies make devices like laptops that are just for kids because you can't get on the internet and you load games on it.
Right.
So there are ways around that. If we're saying having a device is bad for kids, no, they can have a device. It's just you need to make one where they don't have access to the internet.
Yeah, or create more intentional education as to how do you mitigate, right? If you can't go against them, then join them, but join them with the perspective of how do we include or integrate more values and virtue and intentional education in what we're creating.
So, I mean, I leave that part with devices and internet and children to the people who have a focus area on that. So I stay away from that because my children are in their 20s. So my lived experience is not trying to get my children not to use a device because when they're in school, because I'm leaving space for the people who have young children or who have psychology degrees or people who work in early education. I am going to defer to them on that.
Yeah.
But as a bigger picture, we want to make sure that we know that at a minimum in school, that children have devices, because when they don't, if they have a device at home, if they have a device at school, but they don't have a device at home, that means they can't do their homework.
Right. It's pretty amazing for me to still hear about kids finishing up their homework in their parents' phone at a fast food restaurant just because that's how they can get Wi-Fi.
I mean, there's literature coming out now and data coming out now that's saying that we're not going to see any movement about like the increase of digital literacy is stagnant because federal funding has gone away. So we are going to have to take a step back and say, okay, so now what do we do? And that is an issue that we're part of NDIA. So there are entities that are working on that. What we just have to do is pay attention and do what we can locally.
Right.
And I think what we're doing locally is now we're at a point like, how do we scale it up?
Right.
The work that we are doing through the iteration of since 2020 and how hard we've been working on digital literacy, we need to take a bow because around this time last year, we had submitted, when I say we, the city of St. Petersburg had submitted a grant, and at the end of the grant, you find out how many people you're competed against. So there was a National Telecommunications and Information Administration put out a grant to increase. The name of the grant was the Digital Equity Grant. And it was to increase digital capacity, and they had, covered populations, people who had just gotten out of prison, people where English was a second language, people with disabilities, veterans, seniors, people with disabilities, low-income people, and rural people. Mm-hmm. And it was ethnic minorities. Mm-hmm. And so the federal government said, well, you can't do that. And my response to the city was, well, you just take out ethnic minorities because of intersectionality. There's the only people, if you say no more ethnic minorities, the only people who will no longer be covered would be rich Black and brown people, and they can buy their own device. So there were over 700 applications totaling $6.9 billion. There was $880 million available for this particular grant. And the city of St. Petersburg was awarded $6.9 million for 4 years. So if we look at, we talk about how do you measure things, the measurement of what the activity that we were doing from a federal level, I think we were doing pretty good if we were awarded a grant. Mm. That grant funding
fell through. Yeah.
Well, but it fell through, but there are still people that, as I mentioned, NDIA is still trying to get that money.
Right.
But all the people who were working on digital literacy, they were the fuel for that grant.
Right.
So
the collaboration behind it.
They wrote it.
Right.
So because what the city did was say, hey, because when we didn't, I think we missed that part about, well, what did we do? We were doing all this work during COVID and what happened. And in 2023, there was funding made available by the city of St. Petersburg and the Foundation for Healthy St. Pete for 2 years to fund the work of digital literacy. Right now, that particular partnership is no longer, and so the work got taken over really by eSmart Recycling. eSmart Recycling was in that group, and eSmart Recycling, Tony Salvaggio, CEO, said, "Hey, I still want to do this work, and I have a nonprofit that I didn't use that's been dormant because I was involved in this initiative. I don't care that the initiative went away. I still want to do this work." And so the reason this work continues is because in St. Pete and Pinellas is because of Tony Salvaggio and eSmart Recycling and the stand-up of Digital Education Foundation as a nonprofit. So we have to give you a little high five because that's why the work still continues. And there's a possibility that grant will be resurrected. Right. And so because Digital Education Foundation and some of our partners, and I'll call them out now, Community Tech House, St. Petersburg College, Downtown Partnership, Go Zone Wi-Fi,
Foundation for
Healthy St. Pete, Orlando Health, Mount Zion Human Services. So USF.
There's a lot.
And I'm trying to name all of them so I don't get in trouble. So if I missed you, please don't get mad at me because we know that you're continuing to do the work. Career Source.
Yeah.
So Codebox. So there are entities that have continued to engage. Did I say Downtown Partnership? So they have continued to engage in this work.
Lehman.
Yes. Lehman Exchange. Mm-hmm. So there are entities that have continued to engage in this work, even though the coalition that was put together, the partnership or network that was put together went away.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to thrive at all the places. St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce, all the places, the hub, all the places that continue to accept devices that we can recycle. So there are still people who are doing this work, and we'll have an update in 6 months to say, okay, what happened with that money, and how did we reset, because the money's still there. Pinellas County,
Yeah.
Tampa Bay Tech, PSTA. So there were partners in the network that continue to do this work.
Yeah.
Because they know how important digital literacy is.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for that. I also feel like the work that you have done in navigating the complexity of community engagement with a special focus on measurable outcomes, it's hard.
Yes.
And the Digital Education Foundation was able to get this launch pad to sort of take over for other organizations that had tried to do something in this space that was difficult because it was missing the sustainability component to it that could tie everything together. It's also been because of you and the opportunity that you have to understand what is the need of the community and then marry that need with access.
Oh, seniors in service. We've got we did a deployment to their Operation Veteran Connect. So there are people who are continuing to do this work. It'll look differently when we start talking about it more. But I think it's important to sort of give a shout out to did I say the city of St. Petersburg?
For sure.
Who continue to make sure that this work got done. And so, again, other people paused the work. That doesn't mean that the people who were doing it paused. And I just want to thank all the people who continue to support this effort. And they'll be seeing a lot more of us in 2026 because, again, the work continues.
Yeah.
And the more contacts we make, the more people see the need for what we're doing. So I'm just super excited to do this work because we have impact. We're building partnerships, and we're going to make sure that our community benefits from everything that we've been doing.
100%. And I think, like you rightly said, as a community, we understand that there's a need.
Mm-hmm.
I personally understand the challenges of trying to make things happen when you have to work under the scope or under the structure of other organizations. And I just feel like we're blessed to also have that freedom that comes with entrepreneurship, that comes with collaboration, that comes with the ecosystem.
Yes.
Because you have to have the people also trying to solve the problem with you and understanding why solving that problem is important for these initiatives and these movements to start gain some traction and scale. At the end of the day, we know that what we're doing right here in our community, it's a minimum viable product to show how if we just frame things differently, if we collaborate differently, we could solve this issue at scale.
Yes.
And so to sort of wrap today's time together, because I know that we're going to be spending more time together, how do you see 2026 for the Digital Education Foundation? What is your focus, and what is something that we can even tell the folks that are listening, this is what we're going to be doing, help us out, join, do something, we're here?
Well, there's a lot of ways people can help, and it could be making sure you attend a Gadget for Good drive and give us a device to recycle. So when you have devices at home, don't throw them away. Come to a Gadget drive, go to some place where we have collection partners, because what we do with the devices, that's how we get the devices to deploy. And that's super important. If you are a corporation, underwrite a tech hub. It's $7,500, and that includes a year of that includes a year of.
You can start that part over again. If you're a corporation, you can underwrite it.
Okay, so sorry about that. If you're a corporation, you can underwrite a tech hub. So the tech hubs are $7,500. That includes 1 year of digital education. And we also are bringing partners into those tech hubs. So in addition to digital education, we want to make sure that the tech hubs have partnerships for financial literacy. They have partnerships for some job training, just brief classes, because we want people to go to CareerSource where there are more resources.
Well, and we're understanding that some of our partners, like you rightly said, sometimes we create curriculum and we put it out there because we think that people are going to go through it, and then we realize that nobody's going through it.
Right.
We realize that there's a missing component, and it's the component of accessibility. And I think key opportunity of what you're building is the infrastructure.
What we're building. Did I say co-box? If I didn't say co-box, okay.
Yeah.
But yes, we are building an infrastructure that has measurable outcomes and that we can show impact. So again, if you're a community group and you have space and you want to do a tech hub, give us a call. So just being aware, because a lot of what we do is awareness campaigns. How important it is to people to have access to devices. Every time someone thinks of something new, I had someone who was on the board of a statewide health agency, and she called me, asked me, she's like, "Hey, do they have digital literacy everywhere?" And I thought, no, not everybody does it. She said, because I was on this board and they wanted to do something for early childhood and they were doing it online. Okay, so Florida 60% rural. Some places the internet is spotty at best. So you can't build a program that's focused on the internet where people don't have internet. Right. But if you're at a school system, you don't know that not everybody has internet.
Right.
So that's one of the things too, is just an awareness campaign. So,
well, and that's the opportunity to bring partners that can bridge that gap. And every community we go and assess and impact comes with a good understanding of exactly what's the need.
Well, they tell us what the need is.
Right.
So, and I think that's different too. Is every tech hub is going to look different because it's going to be based upon what the community needs.
Exactly. Veatrice, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity.
To all of us there,
bye.
Please like, comment, share, subscribe. All of these issues are important issues, but the only way that we can get these issues in front of decision makers and folks that can really do something about this is by elevating it.
Yes.
By talking about it, by sharing it. We have the belief that most people want to do good. They just don't know how. And I'm hoping that these conversations can help us do that. This podcast is brought to you by the Digital Education Foundation. So please help us share the mission, support the mission, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.